There was a time when the mafia wasn't just a criminal empire, it was the invisible hand that pulled the strings of America. From coast to coast, the mob ran the streets, owned politicians, and decided who lived and who vanished without a trace. Welcome to the Gangland History Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Stoops, bringing you history with a body count. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Gangland History Podcast. I'm your host, mob historian Jacob Stoops, and today I've got something truly special for you. I know I say this often, but this episode is hands down one of my favorites. We're diving deep into the life and legacy of one of the most notorious figures in the history of the Genovese crime family, Tommy Ryan Eboli. And who better to tell that story than his own son, Xavier Eboli. Xavier, a Marine Corps veteran and author of The Boss in the Shadows, The Life and Death of Tommy Ryan Eboli, joins me for an incredible 2-hour conversation. Together, we explore what it was like growing up as the son of a powerful mob boss, tracing his father's journey from a young boxer and as a boxing manager to a feared underworld leader whose career ultimately ended in a hail of bullets in 1972. We'll also discuss Xavier's own life, his time in the Marines, his evolving relationship with his father, and the lasting impact of his father's murder. Along the way, we'll touch on key figures like Vito Genovese, Charlie Lucky Luciano, Vincent The Chin Gigante, Benny Squint Lombardo, and even Hollywood connections to Al Pacino and Al Lettieri. So grab a drink, settle in, and get ready for an intimate, first-hand look at the life and death of one of the mob's most infamous figures. This is Xavier Eboli's story in his own words. Yep, we're now live. So let's welcome into the show Xavier Eboli. Xavier, thank you so much for agreeing to come on my show.
My pleasure, Jake.
Yeah, I was just talking off air, but for the audience, I'll just say I can't take any credit. Xavier went on the Sit Down by Jeff Nadeau, very, very popular mob genre podcast. And I've been a long time listener of the Sit Down, and I heard the interview, and it was just one of those things where you feel compelled to reach out to somebody. And in my case, I felt compelled. I really wanted to talk to Xavier myself. I was lucky enough that Xavier agreed to come on my show. My goal is not to be redundant. I'm sure we'll cover some of the same information, but as I was listening to Jeff's, there were definitely some questions that I wanted to go a little further on, and hopefully we'll get to some of those today. So Xavier, why don't we just jump right in? I think first and foremost, we'll start with you. And this is actually how you begin your book. And by the way, everybody, I said this in the lead, please go and get Xavier's book, The Boss in the Shadows, about his life growing up with his father and also about his father. I will put the link in the video and the audio description, but please do yourself a favor and go out and get that book, and we'll make sure to share the link. But let's jump right in. So Xavier, can you just tell us a little bit about your background, how you grew up, and your family? What are your first memories growing up?
Well, actually, my early years were during World War II, and we were kind of unsettled at the time. My father was traveling around with fighters, which other businesses that I'm not privy to, but we were kind of living with relatives either in New York or in Chicago on my mother's side. So the early years, I don't recall Dad living with us until 1949, I think. Actually, in 1946, right after the war, he bought a log cabin up in Greenwood Lake, New Jersey, where he was training fighters at Brown's Hotel or Long Pond Inn. And Tony Pellone used to train up there, and then Castellani later on. At that point, there was no interstate highways. The roads weren't very good. He used to only come up there from the city on weekends. So I didn't see very much of him until we moved to Teaneck, New Jersey in 1949. My mother kind of put her foot down that she didn't want to be alone anymore up there. And he agreed to buy a house closer to the city so that he could commute regularly. My relationship with him became a disaster after I had that accidental event happen when I hit my mother with a rock. I cover that in the first chapter of the book. I don't know that you want to go into too much detail. You take it away from the reader. But I accidentally hit my mother with a rock, and as a result, I caught a beating that was second to none, and our relationship deteriorated because of that. So, as a teenager, it seemed like I could do no right, and there was always some sort of a problem that naturally I was to blame for. So I don't know that too many. I think there are a good number of people out there who have experienced the same type of treatment as a child. I don't know that it's something that made me better for it or made me the worse for it. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But as I grew older and became more mature, there's an old saying: the older I got, the smarter my parents got. It's amazing.
I try to tell my kids that all the time.
Excuse me. At any rate, and as I matured into an adult and became a family man on my own, my relationship with him got better and better and better, to the point where he used to include me in some conversation that was not too deep, but it involves some things. I've tried to not put those items in the book. I've kept them private.
Mm-hmm.
The things that I did put in the book, I thought to be entertaining, informative, and it makes. I think it makes for a good read. It's not too deep. It's light, and it's a quick read.
Yeah. It's so far it's been very straight to the point in my experience. And I will say, I grew up in a not the same way that you grew up, but I grew up and experienced similar abuse. Maybe you only experienced that one event. I caught my share of beatings as a kid as well. And I will say, now being a parent to three young kids, even the best kids have their moments. And it sounds like that day, by the lake when you threw the rock and it hit your mom, that you just were a young kid at the time having a moment.
I was 8 years old.
Yeah. And it was very much unintentional. And I'll say your father's style of discipline was, I think in those days, it was normal for kids to catch regular beatings, but this one
Oh,
was over the
sure.
top, over the
Yes, it
top.
was. Yes, it was. Uh, it 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 was something that I still recall very vividly.
Yeah, 80 years after the
Oh,
fact or so.
yeah,
Yeah.
76 years at least.
So I think something else people might be able to relate to is, your father's parenting style and um, affection being somewhat withheld. As you grew older, did you feel that began to change, or was there still a distance?
No, I think the affection was there, but it wasn't very noticeable. It was just very subtle.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, for my father to show affection to anyone would have been a surprise. He was not very affectionate that way. Uh, if he was nice to you, that was his way of showing affection. You see, my father, as a child, didn't really grow up in a normal household. I
Hmm.
mean, his mother passed away when he was 3 years old. I think she was 26 when she died, and he was left to fend for himself. Or my grandfather used to drop him off at one of his wife's sisters, and she used to put him in a corner and say, "When we're done eating, whatever's left over, you can eat."
Yeah, that's
And
pretty horrible, even
it's a pretty
even for the
horrible thing
time.
for a little kid.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, of course, by the time he was about 10 or 11 years old, 12 years old, in came Prohibition.
Yep. Yep.
And my grandfather thought he died and went to heaven because now he could make bathtub gin and sell it wherever he wanted to. And that's what they did. They used to go from city to city to city to city if he went with him, if my father went with him.
So so after your grandmother died, this is going very far back in time now.
Yeah.
Um, your dad, I'm sorry, your dad and your grandfather moved to Chicago for a time.
Well,
And that's where.
that's where they were at that time.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, they went straight to Chicago when they came from Europe.
Okay.
Uh, when they emigrated from Italy, uh, they went straight to Chicago because I think one or two of her sisters may have already been there, and her brother.
Okay.
So that was why they went straight to Chicago.
And can you tell us a little more? You describe your grandfather uh, like an albatross, to your father, and any child that has grown up in a situation where, and I don't know if this was the case, I'm just guessing, but some children grow up and become the parents to their parents. And as I was reading this, for me, there were times when it felt a little familiar. And so, I wonder if that was the dynamic between your father and your grandfather, which then led him to be rough as he became a parent. It was maybe a learned behavior in terms of just he became the parent he became because of the way he was also raised
Yes.
and the things that had occurred to him. So I was wondering if maybe you could describe your grandfather and how he came over and how he met Vito Genovese and just how that whole thing got started as Prohibition was getting started.
Well, Vito and my grandfather were both stowaways on their first trip to the United States, and that's when they first met. Uh, Vito had already had a reputation in Italy as being a wise guy, a tough guy, mobster, gangster, whatever the terminology might be.
Mafiosi, something.
And
Yeah.
well, at that time, it wasn't considered. That
Or
wasn't
maybe
a word.
Kimura, something.
It
Black
wasn't.
in.
It
Tough
just
guy.
was. They didn't even mention that word. That word was never mentioned anywhere. I've never heard my father use the word mafia or Cosa Nostra. That's These are terms that have become popular in our vocabularies because movies, because of Joe Valachi, because of whatever. But getting back to my grandfather, he wanted to be a wise guy in the worst way. He wanted to be with Vito, and Vito didn't want him with him because he was a very loud, volatile individual, and he thought that he might be a detriment to his organization. Excuse me. Uh, when my father started to become a teenager, uh, he was my grandfather suggested to Vito that if they wouldn't take him, maybe they'd take his son. So he put my father into that life. And my father, I tell you, one night he had a couple of drinks at my house, and he was very sad about that. He says he always felt that he could have been more successful as a businessman than working in the streets like he did. But that's how he came to that life.
And
He was very
sounds like
well.
one of those things where his path was already laid out
It
before him,
was.
and,
It
there was
was.
nothing he could
And
do.
my grandfather was never very successful at any business he ever tried. And he tried a lot of different businesses. Anytime some opportunity came available, he was willing to try it as long as somebody was there to bring the money. And over the years, I guess my father became used to it. And as you say, the child becomes the parent when that parent is looking for support financially from his children, or at least his son. Uh, and every time he needed money, he got his money. When my father paid the rent on his apartment while he was here, when he went to Italy, he used to send him money every 3 months. And my grandfather passed away in Italy while my mother and father were there. They went to visit him. And he passed away at the same time that they were there.
Wow.
And I met them at the airport when they came back, and he was hysterical. You would think he lost his wife or his only child or his father. And
Had
that's
you
what
ever seen him? Had you ever seen him like that before?
no,
No. Or
no,
since?
I never saw him show that kind of emotion for anybody. Uh, I mean, he barely knew his own mother, but he feels that, or he felt, he felt that she was there for him every day of his life. That she was his protector.
Yeah, that's how mothers
Yeah,
usually are.
yeah,
So at some point, again, I'm not 100% certain of the timeline, but your dad started his own boxing career, which is where he
yes,
got his moniker. Is that correct?
yes. He wanted to become a fighter. he liked to fight. He was a street fighter of pretty good proportions, and he was big for his age to begin with. So he wanted to embark on a boxing career, but his father was against it. Okay, strangely enough, he was against him becoming a fighter. So, between the fact that he was trying to hide it from his father and the fact that at that time, uh, if you weren't Irish, you couldn't get a fight in a boxing ring or an arena under any circumstances. They only entertained Irish boxers. So there was a fighter in the 1880s and 90s who happened to be a welterweight champion, I believe. His name was Tommy Ryan. And being his first name was Tommy, he figured, well, I'll take the name Ryan and I'll be Irish. And that's how he caught on with that nickname, and it stuck with him all his life. And my grandfather didn't find out that he was boxing until he had about 10 fights. And he had won them all. But he made a deal with my grandfather that when he lost his first fight, he would quit fighting. He lost his next fight, the very next fight.
What are the odds?
Yeah, what are the odds? And at any
Could have
rate,
changed the whole trajectory of his life had he just not lost that fight.
Yep. At any rate, a little later on, I guess about 10 or 15 years later, as luck would have it, he stayed close to boxing, and he became a fight manager. He had the knowledge. He taught fighters how to fight. He picked up Tony Pellone when he was 16 years old. Tony was fighting main events when he was 16, 17 years old.
Yeah.
And he was a good street fighter, but he became a better boxer because of it. He had no fear, and he could punch.
There's a picture that I found of your dad standing next to Tony and I believe the trainer. And quite honest, don't get me wrong, Tony looks tough. Your dad in that picture, he's the guy that you look at in that picture and go, that's not the guy I would mess with in that picture. In almost every picture I've ever seen with your dad, he just has a certain aura, toughness, just that look about him. Not a guy to trifle with. So you touched on his managerial career as a boxing manager. So, besides Tony Pellone, what are some of the other boxers that he managed, or who I should say?
In the early 40s, he managed a black fighter by the name of Waylon Douglas, who was a good club fighter, and he had a lot of good fights. He was there to entertain the crowds on the undercards, and he did. He was pretty successful as a club fighter. Then he also managed Vincent Gigante, who had 25 fights, won 21 of them, and decided that he didn't want to really be a fighter. But he had a different life in that it was
Together.
in his horizons.
Yep. Different trajectory altogether, very closely aligned with your dad's trajectory. And we'll talk about the Chin here in a little bit. We'll get to him.
Okay.
But one of the questions I wanted to ask was, do you remember fighters staying at your house in Greenwood Lake or anywhere else?
Yes, and in Teaneck, Tony stayed there when he was in training. his fiancée used to come up and spend 2-3 weeks with us in the summertime also. And then Rocky Castellani, when Dad picked up his contract, and I don't know the circumstances. I don't know how he got his contract, but he picked him up around 1947, I think, 1948. And he stayed with us in Greenwood Lake, and then in Teaneck, because we moved to Teaneck in the spring of 1949, and these were young fellas who were away from home, and I think the family arrangement that they became a part of uh, suited them, and it helped keep their balance. They, you know, when you're in the boxing game, you tend to become a part of a different scene. The whole scenario is something that you wouldn't normally want to bring home. So when you have a home to go to, you tend to keep that part of your life away.
Yeah. How was your dad in comparison to you? How was he with the fighters, just in terms of his relationship and interactions with him? Were they for him father son mentor relationship, or was it just a way for him to make money?
Well, I would say a little bit of both. It was a good form of income for him, and it was also a, I don't want to say father son. I want to say mentor and student.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but their conversations were personal. They weren't strictly business. Uh, it's not that they would entertain each other or go out partying together
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. It was that when we sat down to dinner, he was just one of the family, uh, and he was treated like a person would expect to be treated at somebody's dinner table. I mean, you wouldn't want to be treated by as though you're a stranger, would you? So
Yeah, I would. If that were my situation, I would certainly appreciate being treated like a
right,
part of the family. Yeah,
uh,
for sure.
the only time I think if you want to call it discussing business, uh, my father used to make the fighters write down and keep a record of every time he gave them money
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't normally carry much money. So whenever they needed $10, $15, $20, he would give it to them and tell them, "Don't forget to write it down." And then after the fight, they would tally it all up and say, "All right, you owe me this, and I owe you that, and this." The money gets all straightened out after the purse is taken.
Yeah.
So, uh,
So, do you think? I feel like it's very common for mob guys to had a piece of a fighter to fix the outcome, and I think what is it? One of Muhammad Ali's fights. I think it was it Sonny Liston? Maybe it was
Bernie
Sonny. I
Liston,
can't. Yeah, who took a
yeah,
dive allegedly. Do you think your father ever participated in that?
I don't know that he did. If he did, he kept it a very very good secret and very close to the vest. That's not something you would want to brag about anyway. I never knew of it happening. Uh, I also believe I saw that fight, the first listen, when he was Cassius Clay. I saw that fight. I wasn't at it. I saw it on closed circuit in an armory in Teaneck, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, And you could see that Ali did not want to leave the bench. He didn't want to leave his bench after the fourth round. And they actually had to throw him off the bench. Get out there and fight, you dummy. In other words, if you don't go out there, this guy's going to win. And he's taking a dive, not you. You know? It's so somebody knew something, but whether my father knew anything about it, never said boo about it.
Standing up, they're going to make him sit down. What do you think is going on in Sonny's mind at this point?
Well, I think Sonny now is beginning to worry now. At least his corners beginning to worry now, because I think that they feel now that Clay have all the confidence he needs and go home to defeat Sonny. So I think that the corner now beginning to worry a little bit now.
Now they're working, as we note, with our camera shots in there, below the left eye. They've already worked below the right eye. There you see them. Joe Polino trying to keep that cut closed. Do you feel as though Sonny being busted up a little bit, puffed up a little bit around the face, will this make a difference in Liston's thinking?
Well, they have to make a difference, because Liston now, I think he don't see too well out both his eyes now, because they're pretty well puffed out. And I think Clay got all the confidence he needs now, so I think that he can't him go on winning now.
They might be stopping it. That might be all, ladies and gentlemen. Get up there, Joe. Get up there. Get up in the ring.
So 1952, Madison Square Garden, the Castellani and Ernie Durando fight.
Yes.
That's a pretty infamous one. I think there's video footage of of the aftermath of the end of the fight with your father. I've seen it myself.
Yeah, I have a tape.
What happened?
Oh, what happened? I think there's a certain amount of obviousness in that the referee was pushing Castellani backwards when he was wiping his gloves, and that's when he stopped the fight. He made it look like Castellani was reeling backwards, and he wasn't. He was being pushed backwards by Ray Miller, and that infuriated my father, because he knew Al Wild, and he knew he was a snake, and he knew that what he was doing by being the matchmaker and the manager of the fighter, it was not doing something that was totally legitimate. And when these things started to happen, he was pretty good at smelling out a rat. And Al Wild evidently created that whole scene. It was unfortunate the way it ended, with my father jumping in the ring and having to be banned from a sport that he loved, considering that today it's pretty commonplace. And the entourages that jump in the ring,
melees happen all the time.
They happen all the time today, and nobody gets they don't even get a slap on the wrist, let alone banned for life.
And did he ever get involved in boxing after that point?
It may be in the background a little bit, but he was looking for a buyer for Castellani's contract.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a contract with the guy, and he stayed away from the rings. He stayed away from Stillman's gym. He stayed away from the arenas. And I guess it was maybe 2 years later before he found a buyer for his contract. And the guy came from Cleveland who bought his contract, Alvin Naiman.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's move past the boxing, and maybe this will take us a little bit back in time. But I think if you listen to the Jeff Nadu interview, I haven't gotten to that part in the book, but as I understand it, your father was not one to bring business home or to talk business. Right. He was, as I think the book said, good at keeping secrets. Did you ever find out when he was made into what was then called the Luciano family?
He would never discuss that. My mother didn't even know, because
Yeah.
after he was gone, we asked my mother, "Ma, did he ever tell you when he got made?" She goes, "No, he would never discuss it." She
Wow.
said, I asked him, and he wouldn't tell me.
Yeah, it kept to the code, and just doing the backwards math based on what you're telling me, and based on his alleged position as you got later into the 50s and the 60s, you would have to think 40s, 30s, sometime in that time period.
I know he was working for Charlie when he was in his late teens.
Okay.
I don't think he was made at that point. I don't think he may not have been made until his late 20s, for all I know. I mean,
Okay.
that would be my guesstimate of a time frame, but that's only based on his guesstimate. That's
Hearsay. Yeah. So one of his early mentors was Vito Genovese. You just mentioned Charlie, as in Charlie Luciano.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is Luciano and Genovese, for those that maybe aren't aware, were very closely aligned as you got into the Castellani War in the early 30s, and then over time grew apart, and that happened certainly as a result of Luciano going to prison in the mid 30s. At the same time, Vito steps up. Vito was the underboss. He steps up to be acting boss when Charlie goes to prison. But then Vito catches a murder case, and he goes to Italy, and he's in Italy for almost 10 years before he comes back in the mid 40s and is exonerated in that particular murder case. I've done an episode about it. Who were some of the people your father was around? Because Vito, for at least 10 years, wasn't there, and Charlie wasn't there in the mid 30s. So who was your father around from a mentorship standpoint?
I don't know. I wasn't born until 1939,
Okay.
and I didn't even know there was a world outside of where the dinner table was until I was in my teenage years. So I honestly couldn't even tell you. I couldn't even venture a guess who he was around.
All right.
Maybe Tony Bender.
Tony Bender, Strollo. Yeah, that makes sense. He was one of Vito's guys for sure.
Yeah.
I've certainly got some
think
other guys.
I think there was a guy, and I never met him. I don't know. I heard his name mentioned a couple of times, by the name of Santino.
Okay.
And he, I think, was the boss of the Greenwich Village people.
Okay.
In the late 30s.
I'll have to dig into that name in particular and see if I can
I don't
come
know
back with anything.
I don't know his last name. I know they called him Santino. Sandini.
Okay.
Sandini in Italian. Sandini.
Sandini.
Yeah.
So we've talked certainly a lot about your father. I do want to get back to you. Aside from what may have been going on from an organized crime standpoint, your father did own legitimate businesses.
Yes.
I believe a vending machine business.
Yes.
Were there other businesses as well?
Well, he owned the jukebox business.
Jukebox. Yep. And that was vending machines and jukeboxes were super popular at that point. That's not the first time I've heard of lots of other guys kind of getting into those businesses as well.
Yeah. He also owned an ice cream parlor on 6th Avenue, just off 8th Street, which he turned into a hamburger joint called the Burger Village. He did that sometime in the mid to late 50s. When I got out of the Marine Corps, because I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, I was working in the Burger Village for about a year.
Okay.
And not well paid, I might add. Not well paid.
I can about imagine. And so did your dad did he go to work? Is that something
Oh,
that
yeah,
he did?
absolutely. When I was 13, a freshman in high school, I was going to a military all-boys school on 16th Street, right off 6th Avenue. The name of it was Xavier High School. It was a military high school. It was all boys at the time, and military was mandatory. He used to drop me off there at school on his way to Trian Vending. He was in there at work 8 o'clock in the morning because he was dropping me off before 8 or around 8, and then he would just shoot right down into the village and go to work. He didn't work on the machines. What he did was sales.
Yeah,
He was
running the
out,
business.
he was out picking up clients, getting machines out, getting machines on site.
Yep, getting them placed in
Absolutely.
various locations.
Right.
And I would imagine it would be pretty hard to say no to him.
Well, for whatever the reason, when you are around certain areas of the city on a regular basis, and people get to know who you are, yeah, they want to please you.
Of course.
And as long as they please you, you figure that life is good for you too.
Right. Absolutely. So let's get back to you. You joined. There's actually a picture that has circulated out there. It's you, your dad, and your mom, and you're in your military uniform. You joined the Marines. What made you join the Marines? Well, and by the way, before you answer, thank you for your service. By the way, it's very important to thank veterans for their service.
What made me join the Marines? I like the uniform. I was going to college, and I had struggled through school ever since puberty. When at the time they didn't have a name for it, but today it's known as attention deficit disorder, for which there is medications.
Mm-hmm.
Two of my sons had it, and my youngest son, all three of his kids have it, and they're all fine as long as they get their medication. Well, in the early 50s, nobody knew what that was. Mm-hmm. And all they did was look at you and say, "What's the matter with you? Why can't you get good grades like your sister?" Well, I just can't retain. I read something and I have to read it 6 times before I know what I read.
Yeah.
I had a serious problem with that. And I struggled through high school. Fortunately, I was accepted at a college, at a couple of colleges, and I went to Fairfield University in Connecticut. I finished the first semester. I would have probably had to go to summer school to make up some grades, but I think I got 8 or 9 credits anyway. In the second semester, I went as far as April, and I said, I just can't do this anymore. I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I packed up and I went home. And my father said, "You're either going to work or you're going in the Army." I said, "Well, being I'm no longer a student and there's a draft, I'm going to get drafted into the Army if I don't do something." So anyway, a friend of mine left college about the same time I did, came home, and we got together and we talked about going in the service, and we talked about what branch we wanted to go into. And after much discussion, we both decided on the Marine Corps. Something that had a little bit to do with it was the fact that Rocky Castellani had been in the Marine Corps and participated in the war effort on the island of Guam and on Iwo Jima.
Yeah, the Marines were huge in the Pacific Theater. Yeah.
And he was only, I think, 16 when he went in the Marine Corps. He kind of fudged his application a little. While he was in the Marine Corps is when he took up boxing. He became the middleweight champ of the 7th Fleet, the island of Guam, and all of China. And when he got out, that's when he started to turn pro. Anyway, because we looked up to Rocky, and my friends mostly knew Rocky also. They used to come around my house and talk to him, and he was always very good with my friends. So, because of the fact that he was in the Marine Corps, and we liked the uniform better than the Navy's uniform.
It is a snazzy uniform.
That's how I wound up going in the Marine Corps. It turned out to be my education. What I learned in the Marine Corps was teamwork, leadership, the ability to do things and do them right. In general, it was a whole new way of life. And those things stay with you for life.
For sure. What did your dad think of your service?
Well, he was pretty proud of it. After I said that I joined, he thought I was crazy. He said, "What did you decide to do?" I said, "We joined the Marine Corps today." He said, "You're crazy." Excuse me. Anyway, his pride showed later on, and I think you can see it in that picture.
Yeah. It may be the only picture I can find of your dad where he's smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's beaming. Your dad and your mom as well, and it truly is a really fantastic picture. Yeah. So while you're in the Marines, you get the opportunity to travel all around, and you end up in Naples, and you may be one of the only people on the planet Earth who has had a direct one-on-one conversation with Charlie Luciano. Maybe there are others, but probably very few. So can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Well, I was stationed on an aircraft carrier with the Marine detachment. We provided internal security aboard the carrier, and every once in a while, those carriers, they rotate and they take cruises and deployments to the Mediterranean. We always have, from way back when, and to this day, we have carriers in the Mediterranean providing protection for those border countries and to create a presence that can be respected. It's a 6-month deployment. So our home port while we were in the Mediterranean was Naples. When we were not at sea, we were either mostly in Naples. We made stops in other cities in France and Spain and in Greece, in Sicily. You're all over the European lot. Let's say we didn't go into Africa, but we patrolled the entire Mediterranean. As they do today. While in Naples, let me backtrack a little bit. Before we left for this cruise, I was home on leave, and I told my father, I says, we're going to Naples. I says, I'm going to be spending some time there in Naples. I says, how do I get to go see your aunt? Because my father's aunt still lived in the small town where he was born, some 30 miles or 30 kilometers southeast of Naples. So he says, well, you go see a friend of mine. His name is Cockeyed Johnny. I called him Cockeyed Johnny because he had one eye that didn't go with the other eye.
Lazy eye.
Lazy eye. Kind of wandered all over the place. So he was, he owned a shop where he made picture frames, and made a living doing that. He had been deported by around the same time Charlie was in 1946. So he said, go see Cockeyed Johnny, and he'll take you to meet Charlie. I said, Charlie who? He says, Charlie who? Charlie Luciano. Who? What do you mean, who? It's Charlie who? I says, you mean you know Lucky Luciano? I said, oh, how naive could I be? Here I was, 18, 19 years old, and I'm asking him if he knew Lucky Luciano.
Yeah.
I had no idea he knew him. I honestly didn't. He never once mentioned the guy's name in the house.
Yeah.
He never talked about things from the old days, so to speak. I had no idea. He says, go and see him. He says he'll be looking forward to meeting you. So I went to Cockeyed Johnny's when we got to Naples, and he was pleasantly surprised that I was there and happy to see me. And he took me to a restaurant that Charlie usually stopped at. And he says, he told the manager, he says he's waiting to see Charlie. When Charlie comes in, tell him he's got to see his kid. So that's what he did. When Charlie came in, the guy came over, he sat down, and he just kind of went like that. I said, well, let me introduce myself. And I did. And he said, oh, that's nice. He said, oh, I'm nice to meet you. He says, very soft-spoken, polite, quiet, not what you see in the movies. Let's put it that way. That's not the way most of these guys are. They're very quiet, they're soft-spoken, they don't look to make a fuss over things, they don't look to draw attention to themselves. It's only in the movies. So, at any rate, over the 6-month period that we were there, and we were in and out of Naples frequently, I went to dinner with him many times. I went to the racetrack with him. I went to the theater with him, and we spent many hours just having good, meaningless conversation. Maybe to him it was good. It was nice. I think he enjoyed my company. Maybe for my youth, maybe for the fact that I was coming from the States. He knew that I was not involved with their type of life. So it was never discussed. None of it was ever discussed. And then my father came there. He had just gotten his citizenship a couple of months before. Dad came there to spend New Year's, and I got 4 days leave off the ship, and I stayed in the hotel with him, and he let me wear his suits,
Wow.
which, quite honestly, were just a little bit big for me. So,
Yeah.
but they didn't look too bad. Anyway, I rode in the car, and I rode in the back seat with him and Charlie. Charlie driving his car. Charlie had a little oh geez, I forget what it was. Anyway, it's not important. Anyway, I mean they would talk about the old days. They would talk about things that happened many years ago. Never anything current. Never anything that was so serious that it shouldn't be heard by anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
They had the reasonable conversation between two guys in the same type of business.
Did this is to give listeners an idea of the time frame. This is early 1960s. A lot had happened, over the previous 20 years, right?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about Vito. And again, as I said, I think it's well known that at a certain point, Vito and Charlie were at odds, had some sort of a falling out. And with your father being aligned to Vito, was there any awkwardness as it related to that?
None whatsoever. I think that was a story dreamt up by the writer of that book, The Last Testament.
Which a lot of people say is complete hogwash. Yeah. I've read it cover to cover. It's titillating, but when it's complete fiction.
I've read it 2 or 3 times. I have the book here, and I've read it 2 or 3 times to see if I missed something.
Yeah.
The only thing I think I missed was the author's brains.
Right.
I don't think he had any. I think he wrote that for sensationalism more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
My Uncle Pat was very close with Charlie.
Yeah, but that does come through in the book. Your uncle's relationship, which I never knew about, but your dad's relationship seemed presented as a little more adversarial in the book, which sounds like it's not true at all.
It's not true. It's not true at all, because if that was the case, why would he have offered for me to go and meet the guy and spend time with him? Yeah. He would not have done that if there was just a thin wall between them. He would have said, "Stay away from him. You don't need to know this guy." That's the way he was. If there was any reason why he, especially with one of his kids, let's put it that way, because he was protective in that manner. He was protective, so protective that we didn't know what he did. I mean, all we knew was the guy went out, never came home, or stayed out late, came home when it was just getting light. It was mind-boggling. It was a standard joke amongst our friends. Did your father come home last night? We had no idea, and it was because that was the way he wanted it. And my mother never said a word. And my mother certainly knew what was going on.
Yeah, she knew more than likely.
Of course she knew.
So I'll ask this. I think Jeff asked it. And my son, who's 11, he'll say, and this is what kids are saying these days, this person or that person, they've got aura, right? And I don't think they really know what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But did Lucky still have it, right? Did he still have an aura about him at the end of his life?
Yes, he had an aura, and I could see that the way people would stop him on the street, who were tourists. Uh, I don't know whether it's still this way today, but in those days, in the early '60s, late '50s, the NATO had a naval headquarters in Naples, and he couldn't go near that place. He couldn't go near that place. He was probably on the watch list. If this guy comes around, he's not allowed inside this base. Okay, but guys from the naval base there, they used to come to have a drink with him, have a cup of coffee with him. I don't remember him being much of a drinker at all, but he would entertain them a little bit. What part of the States are you from? Oh, you're from Brooklyn. Okay, yeah, I know Brooklyn. He'd make conversation with them, and they would walk away feeling like, man, oh man, that guy really was really nice. He was a nice man who, not at all like what they say about him back home.
Yeah.
And that's the way he was. That's the way he was. Very, very gentle individual.
And in 1962, he died of a heart attack at the Naples airport, allegedly going to give or conduct an interview with the I forget the guy's name, the guy that ended up writing the book.
Yeah.
What did you, when you heard the news? You had just seen him. What did you think?
Well, it was about a year later. He died in, I think, January of '62. I left to come back to the States. We returned to the States in February of '61. So it was about a year later. My uncle happened to be there at the time, and he was with him at the airport when he died.
Had to be just gutted.
He was beside himself. He was beside himself. But he did have a heart condition, and he was in the middle of a little turmoil there. He wanted to have a movie done about his life, and I guess there was some negative impact there that he was being told not to do that because it would probably bring a lot of heat to the rest of the organization.
And honestly, it would have. It certainly would have. Little did they know that Valachi would pop up a year or so later.
A year later.
Yeah. But today he would have a podcast.
Exactly.
Right.
And probably a couple of million followers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a shame. It really was. It was a shame. It's too bad. He wasn't that old a man, I think.
No, he wasn't. He was a young guy still.
60.
Yeah. When did you get out of the Marines?
I got out in April of 1961.
Okay. And at some point you got married, you came home, got married. When did that happen?
I got married in August of '62.
Okay. So now, had you met your wife before you went away, or did you meet her when you came back?
I met my wife when I was 15 years old. And
wow.
We had our first date when we were both 15. I don't know whether you can see this on the camera. If I can do this, I want to forget the time and the date. We get to that. That was at her Sweet 16 party.
Oh, there it is. Wow.
And I was 16 and she was just 16.
Wow.
And we
That's a
would
great
date.
picture.
That was when we first dated. We dated off and on. We broke up. We go back together again. From 16 to 22, we probably broke up 2 or 3 times. And by the time I was 22 and she was still 21, we decided to get married.
And
We got married in August of 62. And we had our wedding reception in the backyard. I think they copied that in a movie somewhere, didn't they?
well, I was going to ask you. I was about to lead into one of these movies, Goodfellas, because you actually experienced the feeling of not waiting online and walking into places like
Absolutely.
the Copacabana and having a wedding where I'm sure you had an interesting cast of characters probably attend, or maybe not. I don't know.
Nope.
Yeah.
They got an announcement, but they didn't get an invitation.
Okay.
We had 125 people in our backyard, but there was no wise guys there.
Just family.
There was family and friends, and I don't remember any wise guy being there at all. Nope.
So I do have to ask, got to ask about the Copa. It's a legendary place in the annals of New York and wise guy history. So what was it like? Just like describe it for somebody that wishes they could have gone.
Anybody could go to the Copacabana. All you had to do was make a reservation.
Right.
Whether you got one or not was another story. But
yeah,
me and my father's son, I was treated with the respect that they would have treated him if he was there. And there were times when I was there with him. I mean, he knew all the waiters and all the captains. They all knew him. They all said hello. How are you? They all paid their respects, and they treated him like he was a boss, and he was. Whenever I went there, I either went in the side door through the hotel, or I went down through the kitchen.
Just like the movie.
Like in the movies.
And when you watched that for the first time, or I'm assuming you've watched it.
I left.
Did you? Yeah. Yeah, I had to ask.
Yeah, I left. I said, look at this. As if somebody was watching us. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like they were there.
I guess there was a lot of other guys who went in the same way.
Yeah.
It was the comical part of it, that to me was the long line of people waiting to get in would look at you like, who is that? Who is that guy? Why is he going in that way?
Yep.
Yeah, it was kind of funny.
And I'm sure you could feel their eyes on you.
Yes, you absolutely could. And it was kind of funny. One night, I didn't put this in the book, but one night my father had to stop there, and he put the car in the garage, so I walked in with him, and we walked up the stairs to the hotel to go in the side entrance. So as we're going up the stairs, one of the waiters stuck his head out. He says, no, you can't come in this way. You got to go get on the line. He's telling my father that he didn't know who he was. My father says, no, I don't have to do that. He says, I can come in this way. The guy says, no. He says, I'm not going to let you in. He says, look, why don't you be a nice fellow? Get back inside, mind your own business. The guy says, please, I'm doing my job. I was told not to let anybody come in this store, and I'm not going to let you come in. So my father said, call Carmine. The guy says, no, I'm not going to call Carmine. Carmine was the head maitre d'. He's the boss on the floor there. So the guy says, well, what are you planning on doing? Going to get me fired? My father says, I'll fire you myself. What do you think of that? And the guy says, oh, come on, will you please? He says, go ahead. Go around and get online. He says, you better go inside and get Carmine. And this went on and on for a few minutes. And I'm laughing. I'm standing there and I'm laughing at this. I see this going no place but down. And it couldn't get worse.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, when my father said to him, he says, I'll fire you myself. Carmine doesn't have to fire you. I'll fire you. And the guy, now he started to poke his head around a little bit like this, and he went in. He says, I'll go get Carmine. So Carmine came out. He says, Tommy, what happened? He says, the guy's just trying to do his job. He says, but you understand? When you see me, I come in any way I want. It was funny.
Oh my gosh. Can't even imagine. And you would think, being from New York and around the area, that you would know just to let it go.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I got a list of names, and I definitely want to get into especially the end of the 1950s. Things get incredibly turbulent in the mafia. 1957 in particular, and then into the 1960s. So I've got a list of names, and I'm just wondering, if you can tell me your memory of these people, if you met them, if your father ever said anything about them. And then I do want to cover kind of the 57 on up to the early 70s really, really quickly. I'll start with Vito Genovese. Did you ever meet him?
I met him once when I was about 11, 12 years old. I had no idea who the man was. He was, I came home, I don't know, I was out. But I don't know whether I came home from school or what point. When I walked in, he was sitting in the living room talking with my father. And my father said to me, he says, say hello to your Uncle Vito. Now, my father was never one to introduce anybody to any of his kids as uncle or aunt like that. He never, ever requested that.
Yeah.
But when he did, you had to know that it was important. So I said, hello, Uncle Vito. And I wandered on my way. I had no idea who the man was. I never met him again. I never saw him again.
Okay. Frank Costello, the other side of the coin, so to speak.
Yeah. I never met the man. My father only mentioned him once. I think I put it in the book.
Yep. We can save that for the book readers.
Yeah.
Vinny the Chin.
I knew Chin from the time I was probably 6, 7 years old. Always had a great rapport with him. He was a very easygoing, soft-spoken individual, unless he got mad. And when he got mad, he would eat, and that was why he was always overweight.
That was very evident in the 50s.
Yeah. In his in his younger days, when he got mad at something or somebody, he would stutter and he would eat. He would look for something to eat. As he got older, I guess he kind of outgrew those things. But I always had a great deal of respect for him, and I was crazy about the guy. I mean, even in the 50s and 60s, if I was in the city, I would always stop by his cafe, have a cup of coffee with him, chat with him for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, be on my way.
And how close in age was he with you? Maybe, I'm assuming he was a little older, but maybe not much older.
I'm going to say he was about the same age as my Uncle Pat, and that was,
Okay.
He was 14 years older than me. Well, I would think Chin was about the same, about 14 years older than me.
Okay. And the interesting thing, of course, is Chin eventually becomes boss. I think he clearly one of the most respected figures in the history of Cosa Nostra in this country. And of course, everybody knows about, well, not everybody. People that follow this genre know that he did the crazy act, and behind the scenes, he was one of the most stern bosses. You did not want to cross him. And I think it's well been said that of course that was an act, but I have to I have to ask, did you ever witness him putting it on, so to speak?
No, I never witnessed him putting it on. I think it was a little bit more than an act. I think he was really a sick person. I know his wife pretty well, and his wife used to tell me sometimes he really does need that medication.
Really?
Yeah. Again, who's to say? I honestly don't know if the guy was putting it on the way he really was putting it on, or whether he was acting the way he was as a result of being over medicated.
That could be.
Sometimes that'll happen also.
Yeah, that's not something you hear a lot. Yeah.
No.
Albert Anastasia, did you ever meet him?
Never met him. Never heard his name. I don't know that did I put the story in the book about the haircut?
I have not gotten there yet. If you did,
I don't think I did. I think I kind of forgot to put it in there. One Sunday, not long after Albert Anastasia got killed in the barbershop,
mm-hmm.
We were having dinner. I was 17 at the time. We're having dinner in the kitchen, and my father says to me, "You need a haircut. Go get a haircut." I said, "Get a haircut? You see what happened to that guy in the barbecue there? He got killed." He got hysterical. He looked at my
Really?
mother. My mother looked at him like
wow.
Where is this coming from? And I'm looking at them like, what are they making these faces at each other for? I had no idea that they were in the same business.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Sounds like you caught him off guard.
Yeah, it was, and he was hysterical laughing because it was kind of funny, and I agreed. I thought I was being funny. So if I'd have known better, I would have never said anything like that.
Right. But you didn't. You didn't know better.
I didn't know better.
Benny Squint Lombardo.
Yes. Benny, I knew pretty well. He used to come around quite frequently to visit with my father. They used to meet at the Englewood Golf Club and hold their little conferences in a corner. They didn't socialize. At least to my knowledge, anyway. I mean, certainly they didn't socialize with their wives. If he and Benny had dinner once in a while together, they may have. I have no idea. But he used to come once a week to meet with my father. And when my father had his first heart attack, he was in the hospital for about a month. And Benny used to come up there every day. He used to see him up there every day. So, I got to know the guy a little bit.
What was he like? Because there's not a lot of it. He's one of the few guys where there's barely any FBI reports for those of us that dig into it, and just not a lot of information about him. Like 2 pictures on the internet about him.
Yeah. He was for a little guy, and he wasn't very big. He was probably 5'8", 5'9". Couldn't have weighed more than 160 pounds if he weighed that. But he had a commanding voice.
Mm-hmm.
When he spoke, you listened. He was one of those type. They say it about all of these guys.
Yeah.
They have a magnetism about them that when they talk, everybody stops and listens.
Yes.
They want to know what they're saying. And he was one of those type of guys. He really was. I thought that my father had a lot of respect for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to think that Benny had a lot of respect for my father, too.
Mike Miranda.
Never met him.
Never met him.
Never heard his name mentioned in the house.
Jerry Catania.
Same thing.
Never
heard his name mentioned in the house and never met him.
And the reason that I ask about this is there's a lot of information out there. So Vito Genovese, a lot of people believe he gets framed in the late 50s and he goes away to jail. And in his place is said a ruling panel that was there are many different variations, but it's usually the same 4 names being put in. It's your father, it's Benny Squint, it's Mike Miranda, and it's Jerry Catania. And so I guess my question is, which one of those do you believe to be true? Or who was the boss? Who was the person that stepped in the 60s for Vito?
According to my Uncle Pat, he told me, he says, I was in the room when Vito made Benny the boss before he went away. Now, there's been a lot of dialogue in all different directions.
Yeah.
That there was a ruling panel, that Jerry Catania was the boss, and he didn't want to be the boss. He didn't know how to be the boss. Mm-hmm. They wanted to get him out of there, but they wanted him to retire. They gave him the privilege of retiring.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what it is.
And he did in the early, I believe he did, and he stepped away in the early 70s. I'm pretty sure something around that time.
Yeah, he did. I think he did 6 or 7 years for contempt.
Something around that time as well. Yeah.
And when he got out, they let him retire, and he went to Florida.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just reiterating things that I've heard and said, or heard and read. As far as Mike Miranda goes, consigliere, that's my guess. That's my guess.
Yeah.
But that's a guy I never met. I didn't even know what he looked like until recently. I saw a picture that said it was Mike Miranda. So,
very early on in the history of this podcast, I had heard his name quite a bit, and I did a lot of digging and research into him and did an episode. And now that I'm listening and hearing you talk, I think some of my conclusions were a little close, but a little off. Yeah. And, I think the Genovese family was maybe one of the first families that used kind of that, what is now known as kind of a front boss system. And they rotated a lot of guys in and out of that position with maybe Benny in the background.
I think my father was the front boss for Benny from around 1961 until he died. When he got sick, when my father had after he had his first heart attack, he wanted to retire, and they wouldn't let him. They told him that they needed him, and that he was too big a cog in the machinery, and that it was important that he stay. So he stayed. And then 2 years later, they offered him the opportunity to retire, and he said, no, now that you want me to retire, I don't want to retire. That's part of his spitefulness.
Yeah.
And probably it might have had, something to do with what happened. I don't know. It's all speculation. No matter what I say, it's speculation because I wasn't privy to any of this.
Unless you were in the room or unless he told you. Yeah.
No. He did. The only thing he told me was in April of 1972, 3 months before they killed him, that he was being framed in a drug deal. Okay, and that he had nothing to do with it, and he wanted me to know and understand that he did not do anything with drugs. He never did, and he never would. But he was being framed. He didn't say by whom. He didn't say why. He didn't say anything else other than he probably would be facing about 25 years.
So
my comment, which was pretty much rhetorical, is that not too many guys make it to the top and walk away. They either die in prison or they get killed. How prophetic was I?
Very much so.
So this business about him borrowing $4 million from Carlo Gambino, I think that was just a story that Carlo Gambino planted afterwards, which lent a little more credence to the fact that he was probably the one trying to frame him, because he was the guy who framed Vito.
Why do you think Carlo would do that?
Who?
Why do you think Carlo would try to frame your dad or put out this false
Because
narrative?
they didn't like each other.
Yeah.
They didn't like each other. My father never had a kind word to say about Gambino. And he kind of intimated that the feelings were mutual, that, he never had much respect for him because he had a lot to do with framing Vito. When Vito got 15 years, whatever he got, and because of that, there was never any love lost between my father and Carlo Gambino.
Yeah, that's
it wouldn't surprise me if he had more to do with it than it meets the eye. I don't. Again, it's speculation on my part. It's if I'm going to speculate in certain areas, I have to go with the little bit that I know.
I think you've got every right in this case. That's your dad to speculate and want to know what exactly happened. So why don't we just get right to that? So July 16th, 1972. Walk us through that day.
He stopped by my house. I was living in Paramus at the time, Paramus, New Jersey. And he stopped by around 5 o'clock. He was coming by to see his latest grandchild. My wife had given birth 2 weeks prior, the end of June 29th, to be specific, to my youngest son. And he hadn't seen him yet. So he stopped by to see the new baby.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother had been in Italy. I don't remember why, or for who she went with, but she had been to Italy and she was coming back the next day, July 16th. And he had said that he was going to the airport to pick her up and that they would come to my house for dinner. That's Sunday. And he left. He said, "I'll see you tomorrow." That was it.
And that's it? That's the last words you ever spoke?
That was the last time we spoke to each other.
Wow. And then, of course, he's, and again, it's probably a tough thing to talk about. He's assassinated right by his, I believe, right by his car, or as he's walking out of a building. I believe I've seen pictures, and it looks like it happened as he was stepping out of his car. And
he was
don't know if that's accurate or not.
He was trying to get into the car.
Into the car.
Yeah. It was 1:00 in the morning, and he was he had his driver waiting for him by the car. And as he approached the car, the shots came from across the street and from behind him. So somebody was waiting in the shadows by the sidewalk where the car was parked, and somebody else was across the street, and they fired 2 shots that hit the car.
Mm-hmm. So this was clearly an ambush.
Absolutely.
They knew where he was going to be. How do you think they knew where he was going to be?
I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. There's, again, speculation. You can speculate all day long. Somebody knew, and somebody told somebody, and somebody did something.
Somebody went and did it.
Yeah. How else can you explain it?
How did you find out?
My younger sister called me at 5:00 in the morning because his driver, G.I. Joe, went to her house.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that there was a shooting, and he doesn't know whether my father was dead or alive. When the shots rang out, he just took off. He wasn't going to stay there, because now that they had already fired 2 shots at the car trying to hit him, but he was sitting behind the wheel. He had to be sitting behind the wheel, because when they fired the shots at the car, broke the glass, and the automobile glass shatters into thousands of little pieces, And he turned sideways and went down on the seat. So in case any more shots came, it would go over him. Anyway, he went to her house, and she was picking his glass out of his back. And he says, I don't know whether he's dead or he's not dead. He says, as soon as the shots started flying, he says, I took off. He said, he always told me, if anything like that ever happened, just get out of there. Otherwise, they'd go to kill him too.
Do you think the guy felt bad about leaving your father there? Do you think he had any regret?
No, he did as he was told.
Okay.
Joe was very obedient, and when it came to my father, no matter what he said, if he told him to jump off the bridge, he'd jump off the bridge. That's the kind of guy he was. He was a good, loyal guy, but he needed better bodyguards, is what he needed.
More.
Joe was not really a bodyguard. He was his driver. That was it.
Yeah. And then when did you finally get the news that he had passed?
Well, after my sister called, I turned on the television, and in the early news, it was the lead story that he was dead.
And well, I don't feel like I have to ask how that felt. I'm sure it's probably the worst moment of your life, right?
I would feel for anybody to lose a
Yeah,
parent.
worst moment of your life, more than likely. I think the only thing that may ever top that would be losing a child.
Yeah, probably.
So I'm sorry, really sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
So what happens after? What do you do? How do you carry on?
First thing I did was I called my brothers in Chicago, just in case this was a far-reaching thing that they could be next. So they came to New York on the next flight. They were there earlier. They were there by noontime. They were there. They were here. And what happens next after that is you wait until you hear some direction. You wait until some loyal individual shows up with a message that we're sorry that it had to happen, but that's the way our life is.
Yeah. Where was your Uncle Pat when this all happened?
He was out on his boat for the weekend. So, yeah, I guess by the time he came in, I don't know whether he heard it on the radio while he was out on the boat, or when he came in to his marina, but he was out on his boat at the time. But it's a piece of history.
Yeah.
But it's a personal loss that you never forget.
I mean, I can see it on your face. It's 50 plus years later. You can see it right on your face, and it quite frankly, it makes me feel bad for even asking you to talk about it. Tough subject. So your Uncle Pat, he also was part of the life. Did he? Every time I see a picture of him, and there's a few famous pictures, I look at him, and I'm sure he was a tough man in his own right, but he doesn't have the same look as your father. He has a more soft, congenial, friendly look to him. So I guess my question is, why? Why did he follow your father into the life? What made him go into the life?
I have no idea.
No idea.
What
was he like?
To me, he was great. He was always a man that I respected, I loved, I looked up to him. I felt that I could talk to him. He never had a harsh word for me, and just a good guy to me.
And so I have to ask, there's a picture, and it's your uncle right in the middle. And on one side, they're all smiling. On one side, there's Al Lettieri, who played Virgil Sollozzo in The Godfather. On the other side, Al Pacino, who plays, of course, Michael Corleone and went on to be uber famous. And the question I always have is, well, how did your uncle manage to get himself into the middle of that picture? What were the circumstances that led? Because Pacino's making this face, and clearly they're having a good time. And so I've always wondered, what were the circumstances of that picture in terms of why does it even exist?
That story's been told by my cousins.
Okay.
Al Pacino did not speak a word of Italian. And there was some Italian dialogue, as you may recall, in the restaurant when he shot Salazzo and the police captain, and he was my uncle and Al both spoke Italian fluently, so they were trying to teach him to speak Italian. And as you could see in the movie, he gets by a few words, and then all of a sudden he switches to English. That's because he couldn't remember.
Yeah.
He couldn't remember the words in Italian. That was the whole scene.
Really?
That was what that was all about.
Wow. So he ad-libbed that because he just forgot.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And the part of it that's, in my opinion, not to get off on a tangent, that scene is one of the best scenes in movie history in terms of the way that they amp up the drama. But if you've read the book, one thing that drives me crazy about that scene is Sollozzo is speaking. And for those of us that don't know Italian, you don't know what he's saying. You're getting the point based on the way that he's saying it, what he's saying, but you don't quite know. And you only know if you read the book. And it always, maybe it would have lessened the impact had they put the subtitles on during that section. But that always, every time I watch it, it kind of drives me crazy. But best scene in movie history. Interesting.
Yeah.
So
it was pretty interesting.
So I know we're running a little long. Your uncle 4 years later disappears, and I guess what happens? What do you think happened?
What do I think happened? Well, you call it speculation, or call it a little bit of guesstimate. Is that when two relatives are part of that life, and one goes, the other usually goes too. There's no such thing as a saliva. Sooner or later, they'll be looking to get you. In his case, they waited 4 years, but they managed to not bring any notoriety to them by making it a disappearance. There was very little publicity about it. There was hardly anything in the papers. Probably a couple of small articles that never made the front page. But if they had shot him, sure, there would have been a big deal. So my guess, as I said, is the fact that when one goes, the other goes. That's why I was more concerned at the time. I didn't think that my uncle was in that position. I thought he was a little higher up in the food chain than to be treated like that. I thought that he might have survived it.
Yeah.
I was more concerned about my brother Louis in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which turned out to be nothing. But for my uncle, from the day after we buried my father, he was looking over his shoulder.
Yeah.
And he talked about it a little bit to me, told me how he felt, that it was only a question of time, didn't know when, didn't know how. He said, but sooner or later, he says, it'll happen. So,
and that's, so when I look at that picture, which is, I'm guessing it was in 1971, around the time that they were filming, and knowing what was coming down the pipe for your family less than a year later, and then less than, in this case, 5 years later for your uncle, I look at it, and that, quite frankly, it makes me sad to look at, knowing what came down the pipe and how things ultimately turned out. And from your perspective, I think Jeff asked you this, was there ever a feeling from either yourself, your uncle, your brother, to get revenge and to go like, what? Why are you doing this? What happened?
For me, there was never a question in my mind. revenge was out of the question, simply because I was not part of that life.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything that concerned me in that regard. Naturally, it concerned me as a son. But being a civilian, so to speak, it for me to talk about revenge, what revenge am I going to get? There would,
Yeah.
These people kill each other for two reasons: greed and power. If I had killed anybody, not knowing that I was killing the right person, would I have achieved any power? Would I have gotten any money out of it? No. Because it wasn't me. It wasn't my life. It wasn't my place to involve myself in it. As far as my brother goes, I don't know. Maybe he felt like he wanted revenge, but I think eventually that thought disappeared from his mind because he's 1,000 miles away.
Yeah.
As far as my uncle went, he was busted. They took his power away from him, and he was, as I think I said in the book, he told me, he says, I feel like I went from a lieutenant colonel to a corporal. When you lose that kind of strength, that's what happens.
Yeah. And, for you also, there's the extra consideration. Well, number one, as you said, you're a civilian, but you also were a father by that point in time. And it's a really tough spot to be put in.
Sure. You get torn between a rock and a hard place. My sister once asked me, don't you feel like you want to take some sort of revenge? I looked at her. I says, what are you, nuts? I says, I got a wife and 3 little kids.
Yeah.
I says, do I want to make them orphans? I says, they'll kill me. Oh, how am I going to kill? Who am I going to kill? I says, do you know who to kill? You have any idea who did this that you could point them out? He says, where are you going with this conversation?
One person can't go up against the whole organization.
I said, your father didn't want me in this life with him for a reason. I says, because all it's going to do is lead to bad things. It's not going to be any good.
Yeah.
So.
And what is it? I think Francis has said many times, I don't know any family that isn't completely devastated by this life.
I can imagine.
And
it's only I don't know. There's a word I can't even think of it right now. It's glorious to people who don't know anything about it. It's the type of life that they go, gee, what I wouldn't give to be a part of that. Boy, these guys must have make a lot of money. Boy, they can go into any restaurant they want. They don't need reservations. But they don't know any better. They only know what they read in the newspapers. They only know what they see in the movies.
And so let me ask you this: when people like myself who never lived it, never grew up around it, come around asking these types of questions, does it ever upset you? Do you ever get tired of talking about this, of being your father's son, so to speak?
Up until 2 years ago, I might agree with what you're saying, that it could be bothersome. But once I wrote the book, I expected that this would happen. I mean, I get emails all day long from people that are interested all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I've got book festivals that want to highlight my book at the LA Times Festival of Books. I got a company out of Boston wanted to do the same thing. I got a TV station in Ohio that they wanted me to come for an interview or do an interview like we're doing on like a Zoom. But they all want me to pay. Instead of them writing a check, they're asking me to pay for
Yeah.
them to give me
No,
all these accolades.
that's not how it works.
Well, that's
If
exactly what
anything,
I
I
said.
should be paying you. Like,
That's right. And I said, there's something wrong with this picture here. You're asking me for $2,500 so I can appear on your television station?
no.
You should be paying me not only the $2,500, but the airline fare and the hotel room and the car to pick me up and drop me off.
Yeah.
And they left. And I go, what are you laughing at?
There's nothing. Yeah. Yeah.
I says, you go write a book.
Right.
It took me 14 months to write that book.
Yeah. That seems,
And it's only a couple of hundred pages. It's like,
you know, that it surprises me, but it doesn't surprise me at the same time. So, I want to wrap it up.
okay.
What's the last conversation you had with Gigante? And the thing
last
that kind of pushed you
conversation-
away.
The last conversation I had with him was when my uncle disappeared. I went downtown to find out if they knew anything about why he was not around. Did they send him out of town? Did they know he was going to be out of town? Well, the answers were no, we don't know anything about it. And he was in good standing, but we have no idea what could have happened. So I went in Chin's apartment on Sullivan Street, and he said, where have you been? How come you haven't been down here? He says, you haven't been down here in a couple of years now. I says, no. I says, ever since my father's gone, I says, my Uncle Pat told me not to come down here. He specifically said, I don't want you going downtown. I don't want you talking to anybody down there. I'd never asked why. I just said, okay, that's what you want. I said, my assumption is that he thought I might ask the wrong question or say the wrong thing and maybe step on somebody's toes. At any rate, the bottom line was, don't go down there. So I didn't come down. He says, okay, you're here now. He says, you got anything you want to talk about? I says, I came down to find out if anybody knew where my uncle was or why he's out of town. I said, but nobody seems to know the answer to that. I said, you know where he is? He said, no. He said, I don't know anything about it. He said, he said, what are these questions that your uncle didn't want you to ask me? He says, what do you want to know? I said, I want to know why a man of my father's stature had to be left dying in the street like a common bum. I says, why couldn't he just been made to retire? I says, it's been done before. His answer to me was, be glad that you have a grave to go to. He says, not like your aunt and your cousins. They got no grave to go to.
Yeah.
Well, when I heard that, it wasn't the answer I expected. And I said, that's it. I got no more questions.
Yeah. So when you said that to Jeff, quite frankly, my stomach turned, and I'll tell you what I thought. Well, number one, it took a lot of guts for you to go down there and say that.
Well, I didn't take much
out there.
because I knew the man since I'm 6 years old. I mean,
From my perspective, but yeah, you're right. You're right. That's a fair point. Based on what he said and who he was, what I took from that, maybe I'm wrong, was that he knew, but he wasn't going to say. And that's what made me sick.
Do you think you're going to get a straight answer? Do you think somebody's going to say, you think the man would have said to me, well, we had to kill him because of this and this and this? What do you mean?
Yeah. No.
You're not going to get that kind of an answer.
No.
No. That's a dreamer's thought. I knew I wasn't going to get a good answer, but I didn't think I was going to get an answer that was that far off.
Yeah. And that answer, man, that would have, I don't know what I would have done with I would have, that is such a
you'd have got
cryptic
up and walked
answer.
out because there was 7 guys standing around waiting for that. Yeah, go, do what you got to do with them.
Right.
They work on sign language.
Yeah. So this all happened, and you're in your 30s. I'm guessing your age, but I think you're in your 80s by now. This happened over 50 years ago.
I'm
and
85.
Everybody's asking you all the time about your first 30 years of life. And I think the real success for you is your ability to get away, to lead a long and happy life, to own businesses, to have grandkids and great grandkids, and nobody ever asks you about that. So I want to ask you about that. What did you do? What did you do with the rest of your life?
I got out of the insurance business because I had realized, it took me a couple of years, but I realized that I wasn't getting any more business from those bird dogs that I had, who were my father's friends and lawyers and people who could steer business my way. So when I began to see that there was no more business coming, I questioned the bird dogs. They said, "You got to go see the guy downtown. Go see him, and he'll explain it to you." When I saw Fat Dom, Dominic Alonji, and him and I always got along very nicely, very friendly. We used to play golf together.
Yeah, he's in the first few pages of the book. Yeah.
And I said, "Dom," I says, "what's going on?" I said, I don't get any more business." He said, "That's the way you got the business, that's how you lose the business." He says, "Somebody else had to lose it for you to get it. And now somebody else has got it because you had to lose it. Whoever's in charge makes the decision on who gets that business. And there's another guy in charge now, so he makes that decision." So when I saw that, I said, "It's time to get out of the insurance business." I sold my agency. I sold my whatever business I had. And from there, I got involved with the collection agency business, collecting money. And I learned that business. I was partners with a friend, and 3 years later we split up. But I stayed with collections, and I started my own business in 1992, with my oldest son. His name is Tommy also. And he was 27 at the time. And today he's going to be 61 in a couple of weeks, and he's still running the business.
Good for him.
It's a very lucrative business.
Good for you.
Yeah, well, it's good for. What's good for me is that it's good for them. 2 of my sons still own it, and it's now 33 years later. The business has evolved into, it's morphed itself into other areas, but it's basically still collections.
That's a much different legacy to leave.
Much different legacy. Those two sons of mine that own that business today are doing very, very nicely. They're doing very nicely.
And it's those same sons that put you up to writing your book. How did they get you? How did they get you to do it?
No, that was my middle son, Michael, who is he's not in that business. He's been urging me for the last 2 or 3 years to write a book, because every once in a while I tell him a story about something that happened that I thought was humorous, or I thought it was kind of silly, or it was just in general, for general information. To let them know, I wanted them to understand where we all came from and how it was in a different lifetime. Anyway, he said, Dad, he says, you could write a book about this stuff. And this dear friend of mine, Anthony Aversa, whom I've known for years, has also urged me to do this. So I dedicated the book to both of them. And I've always said no. You want to get me killed. You want people to start pointing fingers at me. You want. I said, it's not something you should publicize. It's not. These are skeletons. These are skeletons. Don't you understand that? This is not something that everybody does. This is a different. We come from different ways of life than many other people. They wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
What's the difference? It's a book. You should write a book. So I finally, the opportunity arose when Tony Pellone's son, they were at the induction dinner for Tony Pellone to be inducted into the New York State Boxing Hall of Fame. And Neil Pellone was approached by a writer from Newsday, a newspaper on Long Island. And he wanted to know about his father. He wanted to know about Tony. Because this writer, his father was a fighter also in the 70s and 80s. And he wanted to do a story about Tony Pellone. So he said, who better to talk to than his son? So Neil explained to him that his father had quit fighting long before he became of age to understand what was going on and to enjoy the fruits of his father's fights. He says, but his manager, Tommy Ryan, his son he knew my father from when he was a kid. And he could give you a lot of insight into this. So Neil called me. He says, okay, if this guy called. I said, yeah, have him call me. I'd be glad to talk to him. So this guy called me, and it turns out that he had some questions about Tony, and we had great conversation, and we got along really well. And then the thought at some point in a week or two after that about writing a book became more of a reality. I said, maybe if that guy's a journalist, maybe he could do this with me, because I wouldn't know how to put a book together. So I got back in touch with him, with Bob Cassidy, and I said, if I write a book, I said, you want to be involved with it? You want to put it in context, to polish it up, put it together, so it all comes together? He said, yeah, that'd be a great idea. He said, I've written a couple of books already. He says, I don't kind of know what to do. So we got together and we made a deal, and he worked with me all the way. I wrote the stories out, and he polished them up and put them in context, and voila, you got a book.
And how did it, when you got your book back, how did it, I'm a person that still likes the feel of the book. I don't read on a device. I like the feel of your traditional book. How did it feel when you got it back?
It feels good.
Yeah.
When I eventually got the book in book form, I said, boy, that was a lot of work. I said,
yeah.
You don't realize how much time and effort goes into that. I had probably 500-600 pages of handwritten stories and notes.
Wow.
And it had to be condensed. It had to be embellished upon a little bit. It had to be researched. There's some facts and figures in there that I would have never dreamt of, but Bob researched them and found them. He also got 250 pages of FBI reports on my father, and he sent them to me.
Yeah.
And they're thick.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea. Some of it was wiretaps, some of it was hearsay, some of it was informants. It came from all different directions. I think some of it they made up themselves just so they had something to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always digging in FBI reports. I sometimes ask myself, what must the mailman who's delivering my mail be thinking week after week when I get this paperwork from the FBI? But I'm personally, I'm really glad that you wrote the book. I'm one of those people. I'm a historian, and many of the stories at this point have been lost to time, and many of the people, like yourself, are no longer around to tell the stories. And so for me, I'm trying to do my part to go and collect and preserve the stories, or to go dig and retell the stories that have been lost to time. So I do think people like yourself that were just so firsthand experience, it's very important that you put together and put your thoughts down on paper. And the funny thing has been that when I started this podcast, I didn't grow up in this, but I have some family friends that were in some small ways adjacent, and to a person, they all said, "I don't think that's a good idea." And I said, it's 2021. Sammy the Bull, Michael Francis, they've got podcasts. I think it's okay. I think I'll be okay. And so when you were saying that, it just resonated. It reminded me of that, which I always laugh at that. I think it's funny. But
tomorrow night I'm doing a Zoom with Bob Cassidy that he'll be posting on YouTube under his Throwback Media. He says we're going to cover a little different area that I really don't want to go into tonight. If I do that, then what's the point of tomorrow night?
Right. Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot. Certainly did not expect to keep you this long. I do want to let you go. We are recording very late, but I do appreciate it. This was such a great conversation. And for those listeners, if you're still on, go buy it. The Boss in the Shadows, The Life and Death of Tommy Ryan Eboli. You can get it on Amazon. Go buy it. Do yourself a favor. It's been, I'm a little ways into it. It's been a really good read. And believe me, not every book that you get in this genre is a good read. This is one of them that is one of those good, easy reads. And that's a testament to your work. So I definitely want to get as many people as possible to go out and buy the book, please. Xavier, thank you for coming on. Really great conversation, and we'll part ways. I always end the episode just by saying to the audience, grazie.
Take everything I've said tonight with a grain of salt. I'm not a bad guy.
Right.
There have been bad guys in the world, but I'm not one of them.
No.
It's an unfortunate thing, I think, to grow up in this type of environment and have to bear the brunt of the results of this environment. It is what it is. We learn to live with it, and it makes us better people for what we are.